And in leadership teams, if we are not aware of ours and each other's egos, if we do not know how to bypass the egos, when it has a chokehold on us so that we can serve the greater good, we are just going to be spinning our wheels.
Amy Woodall, I am super excited for the opportunity to have a fellow podcaster on. So you knew the ropes, you knew what we were doing, hopping into it. I'm over here thinking, I need to learn a thing or two from you, which I already have. But I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to have you on the show and talk a little bit more about this thing called wellness. So thanks for being on.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Absolutely. So conscious habit started off, correct me if I'm wrong, as somewhat of a podcast, but also kind of a movement.
Yeah, I don't know if this is true for you, Woody, but I have a million ideas a day. That is the entrepreneurial mind,
Sure.
right? Probably what has led us both to do this work in the world is managing ourselves first, and then we go teach it to the world. But I knew conscious habit was going to be my thing. And I am somebody who needs to write big, scary checks, to be like, okay, I set the trap. And so I did that in starting the podcast a couple of years ago. But Conscious Habit was a company before it was a podcast. And there's definitely this movement. I feel like I'm on this planet to help as many people rise to their level of consciousness, as possible. And the podcast is one of those fun avenues to do that.
Absolutely. I think that's phenomenal. And I promise we're not going to talk all podcasts today, but it is funny. And I'm sure you get this a lot. People that reach out and say, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And you immediately your gut clenches and you cringe a little bit and you're like, please no. I get it a lot in the event management space. People are like, I'm thinking about starting a 5K. And I'm like, what do you do? Well, I'm a legal aid organization. What's that have to do with running 3.1 miles, right? It's like, it's what's the purpose behind it, right?
Yeah.
I love to talk. I love to connect with other people. I love to collaborate with like-minded human beings. I would be doing this if I got 0 listeners, because it's just a phenomenal platform to spread my message. And also I love to connect with other people. Have you found the same thing?
Yeah, I think selfishly, I was like, how can I have a platform where I get to invite on the people that I admire, that I've learned from? And I'm sure you've learned this too, is that you would be surprised how many yeses you get from folks who are like, oh, this is a New York Times bestselling author. I've followed them for years. They'll probably never respond to me. And then they do. And they're like, sure, I'll come on your podcast. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So selfishly, it's a chance for that, a chance to meet other people that are doing this conscious work in the world, like yourself, and, know that we all have our slice of what we're doing, to be able to bring this work to the world at large. And I feel like it also is a chance to continuously practice, what we're working on. So it checks a lot of boxes for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody's always like, hey, I got a podcast that you should listen to. And I'm like, I listen to the people that I have on my podcast. That's where I get my knowledge from.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's good.
I just bring them onto mine and then I spread that to the world. And you couldn't be closer to the truth. I mean, that's exactly why people that listen to my podcast know I'm creating a model for well-being. And part of that model was I got to talk to a lot of really, really smart people because I don't have all the answers. And so I might as well record it while I'm doing it. And everybody can learn from it. Right. So that's the go-giver mentality. So that's great. So Conscious Habit is a phenomenal organization. And I'm going to make sure everybody can find out more about that. But tell us a little bit more about kind of what you do and who you help and kind of how you got into this world.
Yeah. So I'll start with the end in mind, how I got here. It took me until I was about 30 to find my footing in my career. I dabbled for, quite some time. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 24. I will proudly say I've only been on college campuses to go to frat parties, although now my kids are of college age. So I've been on college campuses for, tours for them, but I've always just been in such a hurry to get the next thing, done. So, found my real footing at 30, and I was working for a performance improvement company that specialized in sales and really fit my entrepreneurial heart because as a middle child, I'll just spill all my baggage here for you and all the listeners. I've never liked to be told what to do. That should tell you a little bit something about my MO. So very entrepreneurial company. I know how grateful I am that I had an incredible mentor from the beginning, Tim Roberts, who saw something in me I did not see in myself. I did not know the capabilities, but he really had an eye for, what I could be molded to be. And this emphasis on the company I worked in was in psychology and neuroscience. And so I just became obsessed with learning. And fortunately, I have about an hour commute everywhere I go. I live in the middle of BFE, absolutely nowhere. And so Windshield University, like, oh, I'm going to the grocery store. That's a 30-minute drive. Pop on a podcast, listen to a book. And I really began to, take all of that stuff in. Well, I imagine you're probably hardwired very similarly. I am a root cause kind of girl. I do not like to put Band-Aids on things.
You're speaking my
right?
language.
Yeah. So we would be doing this really incredible work, helping organizations improve their performance and sales, their outcomes. But when I would sit down with the executives, we'd look at it. We would see there's attrition on the operations and service side. And why? Follow the root. Oh, they're not speaking the same language and following the same process as sales. Okay, let me be a hero and go create this customer care program and, make this my baby and train it to the world. So I did that. And we started teaching this to the world. And I thought it's going to solve all the problems. I love how naive, I continue to think I know the answers and I'm always proven wrong. I love that. So we teach this. And did we see some improvement? Yes. Did it solve all the world's problems? No. Why? Oh, because that's right. Sales and service hate each other with all their heart and soul and all languages and countries and industries, globally. So the next thing I began to really, hone in on is conflict management. Okay, I've become an expert of humans because at this point I had spent many, many years studying, working with, understanding humans, the psychology of humans. So, well, let's work on conflict management. And so I went and, worked on that program, wrote it for corporate, started training it globally. And then I follow the route. Oh, all of these problems and challenges begin in the minds of the humans that are projecting them onto the business. And simultaneously, I was on my own awakening because I think we're called to this work as we're doing the work. I was in this place where I was tired of chasing fulfillment and being good enough. I had made it. I, was very fortunate to become successful in my career, make more money than I thought I would ever make, be traveling, all of these things. But I still had the same pit in my stomach. Even though I loved the work, I still had a longing of something that was missing. And so I was on my own, awakening of learning how to like myself more than I needed my outcomes to prove back to me. And a lot of my work with clients began to become more like counsel for them in a sense where we were helping them navigate these problems from the inside out. And the problems begin at the root of perception. They always start in the minds of humans, and then they are made the problems of other people. So I started teaching these concepts and they wanted more of it and more of it. And they're like, what is this work we're doing? And it really forced me because you know how it goes. It just keeps showing up in front of you. And I had to think, well, what is this? And we were really working on consciousness, understanding, having an awareness, taking ownership, understanding our ego, learning how to lead with love. We were making consciousness a habit. And so a long answer to your question, but that's how conscious habit was born. It was following the root, and the root of result begins within.
That's great. That's amazing. A long answer is the only answer in that situation because that's a powerful journey. And I too love human psychology, and people might ask, why would you care so much about how humans think? We're all messy and sticky and gross, and it's just so complicated. And
Yeah.
I'm like, we are also the most powerful species on this planet. We are making the decisions that will determine the outcome of everyone else on this earth and ourselves, right? There's everything from the people who are feeding us that are farmers to the people who have hands on the buttons, right? Those uncomfortable thoughts. We're the top. And so why would we not want to know everything there is to know about the decisions we make? Because very rarely, as you probably know, are they are logical group of decisions. Typically we decide on emotions, we decide on perceptions, we think so much unconsciously. And that's what I really appreciate about some of the work that I see you do in this idea of mindfulness and meditation and that practice, which I still think, even though it's becoming so mainstream, still gets a lot of bad rap and
Mm.
misunderstandings of what it
Mm-hmm.
is. It's not
Mm-hmm.
chimes and woo woos and sitting in lotus pose, which I still can't do. It hurts so bad, but it's being conscious of your perceptions and your misunderstandings of the world. And so I'm really interested to hear, Amy, what kind of clients typically come to you, and what is
Mm.
it that they're working through that makes them go, I need to talk to Amy.
Yeah. So there's really three things that we focus on at Conscious Habit. There's one-on-one coaching. There is conscious leadership development. And then there are retreats that we often do with leadership teams. But you know what has gotten a lot of traction is women's groups within large organizations where they're like, I've gone in and done, kind of 2-day retreats for them. So on the one-on-one coaching side, oftentimes it's CEOs or executives where it is lonely at the top and they have hit a level of achievement and they're like, I still feel like I'm chasing the next thing. And I don't want to feel like that. Like, how do I get that feeling inside that I have been looking for in my outcomes? And so conscious habit, one-on-one coaching meets them where they are. We really identify the patterns that they hold in life and help them sort through all the things. So we provide a safe place to share all of the things. And because we have both a business background, and this human behavior stuff, it could be bring anything in life. We're not going to play therapist. We'll know when to refer you to your therapist or recommend one to you, but we're going to help you untangle the you parts that are wrapped around that and help you navigate them more consciously. So there's that from a one-on-one. From a leadership perspective, we all have ego. All of us are not aware of the difference between our ego and our highest best self. And ego is not all bad. It can operate in service of the greater good, or it can create an absolute disconnection. And in leadership teams, if we are not aware of ours and each other's egos, if we do not know how to bypass the egos, when it has a chokehold on us so that we can serve the greater good, we are just going to be spinning our wheels and, layering up. There's so much good leadership training in the world. We may continue to seek all of this training, but we haven't gotten to the root, which is internally, right? And then the retreats allow 2 days of this practice of the conscious habit framework in teaching awareness and ego recognition. And it does sound a little woo, and I understand that. I put the woo in Woodall, as I lovingly say. It just so happened to work out really well when I married my husband.
Amazing.
He had no idea this is where we would take that. But what I have found is that every one of us, whether we are running a multi-billion-dollar company or whether we are struggling to make ends meet, we all just want to love ourselves and love our life. And it's such an honor to be able to spend just 2 days with people to help them do that more consciously and help them recognize the tools that they have at their hands to be able to live that way.
Yeah. We're like the exact same person. You just obviously are, you have nicer hair than I do. But
I did
it,
wash it today, so
well,
thank you
hey,
for
me
noticing.
too. Me too. It's amazing how so many people in this world are out doing the things that you do, but you just don't meet
Mm.
them. You almost feel like you're on a tiny little island all by yourself. Like, why
Yeah.
don't people get it? And then you meet
Yeah.
on a podcast and you go, oh, people do get it. That's amazing. I can only imagine that there'll be more than one conversation between you and I, because that's almost identical to what I do in terms of one-on-one coaching with individuals who are striving for fulfillment. They're crushing it. So I use a model that I've created around the different dimensions or aspects of our well-being. And so they're crushing it in a couple different aspects of their life. Financially, they're doing great. Occupationally, they know what they want to do with their life, but physically, they've just let themselves go. And
Mm.
emotionally, they don't know how to manage themselves. And so that ruins their social aspect because they don't know how to connect with their team or their family. They're never home. They don't, when they do get home, they're working because they're scared of the conversation they have to have that they're
Mm.
unhappy in their relationship or that their wife's unhappy. And so they just bury their head in their laptop and keep moving. Right. And so it's that recognition of understanding that there's so much to us beyond just our job or even our parenting. A lot of people are like, I'm a parent always. And it's like, no, you're not. You can't only be a parent because guess what? They turn 18 and then you're no longer a parent. You're a trusted
Right.
advisor.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to recognize you have to have an identity outside of that, or you're going to
Yes.
find yourself staring at your wife or your husband after 18 years and going, who the hell are you? So
Well,
you,
I mean, I think for many of us, we might spend more time trying to figure out how our smartphones work than we do ourselves.
mm,
And really, a genuine curiosity. There is not any other human on this planet that you have spent as much time with as yourself. You can't escape you. It is till death do you part. And then who the hell knows after that, right? There's lots of theories. We all have our belief systems. But if we're not spending the time of saying, how do I learn how to love this thing? How do I learn how what gets it going and makes it angry or makes it feel insecure, insignificant? How can we just have this genuine compassion, love, and curiosity for this operating system that is us?
yeah, truer words haven't been spoken. And the fear that we have of our emotions, right? This idea, I had a client once who said, I know that anger is a sign of weakness. And I said, whoa, hold up for a second. What does that mean? Because they had been taught that if you get angry, that means you're not in control of your emotions, which means
Mm.
that, you're weak. And it's like, well, first of all, you're going to get more angry at yourself for being weak. And now it's just a reciprocal cycle. Instead, let's ask ourselves, what is anger? Anger and all emotions are just information. It's our body telling us something's up. And it's either a car's about to hit you or your coworker did the same mistake for the 15th time in a row. And now you're angry. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with being angry. It's what you do after the fact, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
what
Mm-hmm.
conscious action do you take after the fact that really matters the most. And so I think it sounds like you similarly help people recognize what are those belief systems that we have, what's going on when we do have an emotion, and how do we become more mindful of it so that when it happens again, we're more prepared to manage it.
Yeah, and honor it. I mean, my own path, as I mentioned, like I have been a student, I continue to be a student, and I would not be a very good teacher if I, wasn't practicing these things that I'm doing. And there's lots of times I might share something in the world and I hear it come out of my mouth and I go, oh, damn, I need to actually do some more of that because I'm in this place where I needed to hear that. So I think that there's always this, how can I embody what is being spoken through me? A few years ago, so I am one of some of the greatest work I get to do in the world. I'm also the co-founder of High Vibe Tribe Retreats. So we do women only, and we are very passionate about that because it gives a chance for women to heal some of their feminine that maybe they had to suppress to get by in a very masculine world. And I don't mean masculine being men only.
Sure.
Masculine energy is like, get shit done, drive to the next, grind, hustle, which we need that in order to move things forward. But if we completely avoid the feminine part of us that is love and compassion, men have it too,
Yeah.
then, we're going to be less connected to that inner fulfillment. So these retreats that I co-founded with Desiree Garcia, who also, she joins me on the podcast. I think you were listening to one of those
Yeah.
episodes.
Yeah. It was great.
We get to do these somewhere, different in the world every year. It's the greatest work that we get to do to teach people how to slow down and connect to their being and learn how to breathe. And, but on one of our, this is really hard work, Woody, we sometimes when we do this, so we were in Tulum a few years ago and we had to go do this exhausting site visit where you just have to, go hang out on the beach and
Man.
try out some of the spa services.
Of
And so I
course.
signed up for this spa service that was called Mayan Healing Massage. And I thought, oh, I'm going to have the massage of my life. I'm probably going to have like Mayan clay And, I'm like so excited. And what I did not know is that I signed up for an exorcism. That's basically what happened. And I had this little woman who was a 7th generation Mayan healer named Maria Luisa, who was all of 5 foot tall, if that. I think this woman's like probably 4'11". And she had to be 107 years old. And she had the strongest hands I've ever felt in my life. And she's doing, truly, it was an emotional release massage. And she began to rub my abdomen, and I'm wailing in pain. And she got in my face and she said, "You do not feel, you think. You have to feel." And by the way, when I say exorcism, it's because she then began to burn this herb. And when she ran this herb over my heart, I have never cried so hard in my entire life.
Man.
It was this major release. But
Yeah.
this was 2021. And what it taught me was I thought I understood emotions because I could be aware of them, but I actually never allowed myself to process them in my body because I would make them my mind's problem to solve.
Yeah.
And so, anger, man, what a beautiful emotion. Let me sit with that and feel it. There's actually a meditation where you smile with your emotions. Let me feel anger and then let me smile with it. And let me feel sadness and let me smile with the sadness. And it is learning how to welcome in these emotions to be felt, not thought, so they can be fully processed and we can really understand what they're trying to teach us. So I'll never forget Maria Luisa. She changed my life. And now I know what a Mayan healing massage is.
Now the question becomes, do you warn other people when they say they signed up for one, or you just say it's going to change your life?
Enjoy. You're going to feel incredible when you're done.
Don't take away that experience from them.
Yes,
that's great.
Yes.
I love that. So I have a 5.5-year-old. My wife and I talk a lot about emotional regulation. My background, my upbringing is what caused me to get very excited about emotions because they weren't a thing that we discussed or talked about or had any chance of regulating growing up in my household. And so one of the things we really, really love to study is this idea of emotional regulation. And you mentioned, sitting with emotions and just allowing them to be felt instead of fixing them. And one of the biggest mistakes that, and I'm going to use parents and kids for a moment, just because it's a little easier because kids don't try to regulate their emotions as much, which is powerful in a lot of ways. But when a child's going through something strongly and they're crying or throwing a tantrum or whatever, we try to reason with them. We say, well, have you considered, just picking up the cookie instead of throwing a tantrum? Or have you considered, it's like we're talking to that logical part, and that's not how our brains work. And so it's like trying to talk to a kid who's under a sprinkler and getting drenched, like, hey, just step out of the sprinkler. It's like, that's logical and that's wonderful. That's great. And you're trying to fix the problem, but that's not how this is going to work. And so I think this idea that we've gotten into in our society of both we need to fix every problem, A, B, that emotions are a problem, and C, that it can be done immediately, is a little bit misplaced. I think that the ability to sit with our emotions more, that does not mean, in my opinion, that doesn't mean just allow them to happen and who cares who gets in your way when you throw a rampage, right? There's actions that we need to be responsible for. We can't just yell at people and then say sorry later every single day for the rest of our lives. But I love your sentiment of making sure that we can sit with our emotions, allow them to be, instead of just, I smiled when you said I made them brain problems that I tried to fix, because that's mine as well, right? Oh, I know I know this emotion. I know what to do in this situation. It's like, well, just shut up and feel for a second, dude.
Yeah, and the mind can create, the mind with love. I say this, Woody, is a little bitch. It can talk us into, we can create any scenario and justification for anything. So if we have a feeling of anger, our mind can say, it's because of this, this, and this, and let me count the ways. And I can feel very justified in my anger, instead of just saying, what is it here to teach me? Let me be curious about this. I'm open to it. And it's okay to feel angry, and really allowing it to speak to us. The body knows the truth. The mind will make up any version, to justify. And so I think that's kind of the path of like, how do we just keep the mind, or at least at least the egoic mind, because the egoic mind is a fantastic storyteller. And if we believe everything it tells us, we can weave a tale of justification and wallowing in our own emotions. So I do think there's that gap between feeling them, honoring them, but not needing to justify the story
Mm,
that our mind may want to create.
yeah. Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I've mentioned him before on the show. There's a meditation teacher by the name of Joseph Goldstein,
Mm-hmm.
who is Dan Harris's teacher, who wrote where is it at? Right there.
10%
Yep,
happier?
10% happier.
Yep.
Yeah. So he is a phenomenal teacher, and he does a lot of I use that app on a regular basis. That's my go-to meditation app. And so he had this sentiment where he said, one of the it's impacted me so strongly. And when you're meditating, or when you're feeling emotions, or when you're thinking through things, try to disassociate who you are with what you're feeling. So for instance, if
Mm-hmm.
you are feeling anger, instead of saying I am angry and trying to label it that way, say there is anger. And what I found through that, and you can do that in a number of ways, there is sadness, there is hunger, there is joy, right? By disassociating yourself, your being, from those emotions, it gives you the opportunity to distance it, because the anger probably came from somewhere else. You didn't just wake up and choose to be angry. Now you
Mm-hmm.
may be likely to be angry than other people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's who you are. And every day you get to choose a different story. So that has been really powerful for me, to be more conscious of it by just simply labeling there is anger. And then that gives you
Mm-hmm.
that opportunity to distance yourself and ask yourself, be curious, right? Not judgmental. Ted Lasso / Walt Whitman.
Yes. Ted Lasso first, of
Yes, of
course.
course. That's awesome.
I think that's great advice. Depersonalize it.
Yeah.
Don't make it yours. I mean, be careful about the I ams. I think that is just, listeners, that's a great takeaway from today, is like, be very careful with what follows I am.
Hmm.
We don't want to make that a part of our identity, for sure.
That's great. Yeah. So you mentioned this idea of working with, CEOs, working with groups, retreats, all things that I really enjoy. And when you go in there, you're trying to help them better understand themselves, their own thought habits, because that's where it starts. It starts here, and then we take actions, and we make habits, and we create cultures, and we start, run, and sometimes burn down businesses based off of those thoughts and those conceived notions. So what I want to ask you now is can you maybe describe for us some of the general qualities that you're seeing in people when you first come into an organization that lets you go, okay, we have some work to do here. There are
Mm.
some things happening that are leading me to believe that we are not regulated, or we
Hmm.
need to go through this process. What does that look like?
Hmm. Discourse, if there is sort of turf battles, or, I'm always listening for judgments. I think judgments are one of the greatest opportunities for us to really lean into our own consciousness and do our own inner work, because the world is our mirror.
Mhm.
The eye see what the brain believes. If I see it in you, I have it in me. And so I listen for discourse and judgments. That's at the very least telling me there's an opportunity for some ego awareness there, if nothing else. And everybody has ego, and ego is not terrible. It can be good, but we have to have it working in service, as I mentioned, prior to. So that's something that could be there. I think, I also work with very innovative cultures who are on the cutting edge of trying new things. And it's likely that maybe they've been practicing mindfulness, or they're working on those pieces, and the conscious habit. It's really this combination of mind, body, and spirit that comes together. And so, teaching some of those principles more deeply in that organization. So companies who are on the cutting edge, they're like, hey, we're already doing this. We want to dive in. But I would say, discourse, lack of alignment, and turf wars is probably the number one.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned previously, I love that you continue to kind of repeat this idea that the ego is not a bad thing, because one of the things you mentioned previously was this idea of doing a women's retreat and kind of reconnecting with feminism in a masculine world, but masculinity is not a bad thing, and neither is feminism. And I agree on all of those accounts. I think it's recognizing the power and the benefit of those things so
Mm-hmm.
that you can use them when they're necessary and set them aside when they're not, right? A hammer is
Mm-hmm.
not dangerous until you swing it the wrong way, right? And so it's recognizing when the ego is good, when the ego is not serving us anymore, not bad, just not serving us in this moment, so that you can again be more conscious and choose a better route.
Mm-hmm. I think all things are like yin, yang, alpha, omega, the feminine energy, masculine energy, also, and like that's the world we want to live in. When we go either or, like either I show up in my full masculine energy or I show up in my full feminine, when we get to either or, we really begin to create limitation for ourselves. And so I think that also and mentality is important, in creating that balance between the two.
Yeah.
And I could talk about ego all day long because, I think ego, it is a place of protection, but the voice can have us questioning whether we're good enough or worthy enough. And if we just know when that pops up, then we can give it some reassurance. So again, it can work in our favor. And instead of us feeling like, I made a mistake, my ego is hung up on perfectionism. I made a mistake and now I can't even be open to learn from it because I'm afraid that if I'm wrong externally, then I'm bad internally. And this shows up in different ways. There's perfectionism, there's, martyrism, there is high need for approval from others, there's achievement, there's these different sort of ego voices that it makes it basically a shit sandwich, if you will, if we're expecting those outcomes to prove worthiness, like we talked about before. So, man, learn learn the difference between your ego and your highest best self, and not that life becomes easy, but you create a bigger gap between reaction and response, and a much more thoughtful, loving, connective gap between those two things.
Yeah. 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 I mentioned earlier this idea that, humans are the most powerful species. And I don't mean that like, like I'll never beat up a tiger if it's just me and him, right? He's going to win every day.
Mm-hmm.
I may have, like, if I come up with an armadillo, if me and him tango, I might have a chance, but maybe not. But we are making huge decisions that impact all the other species and all the other individuals of the world. And we will decide what happens to this planet unless the asteroid does it first, right? So this idea of separating reaction from response, I think, is so powerful, and why people may be like, well, what's the big deal if we get angry once in a while? It's like our biggest source of ability is this, right? It's not the entire thing, even. It's this part right here, the prefrontal cortex. Probably more than I do about it, but it's this idea of how can we think logically? How can we look into the future and use it to our benefit, not to our detriment of high levels of anxiety all the time? But that's what separates us, that and opposable thumbs, right? So this idea of how can I make sure that whatever kickstarts in the back of my brain, the emotions, does not affect the decisions I make forward is an astronomically important one, because that's what's going to change the outcome of a nation. That's what's going to change how you connect with your kids. That's going to change how you end up showing up at work. All of those things matter. And so I think the simple fact that you brought that up is profound, in that gap, the ability to manage that gap between that emotional reaction and the logical response is almost everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the place of possibility for sure. For sure. And, that's where highest best self is. Like, I feel like the ego is a bit more emotional, not to say that, we as humans don't have that, but the ego has a lot of emotional stories. It's triggered a lot faster than, that the higher self is. And that gap between is definitely where we can step into that